Welcome back to Faith and Freedom 250, a series from the Herzog Foundation. Today we reflect on the words of President Ronald Reagan, who reminded America that without God, democracy will not last.
Our 40th president didn't get the nickname the Great Communicator by accident. Ronald Reagan's ability to find common ground and connect with his audience was one of his greatest strengths. Like many leaders before him, he understood how to tell a good story and draw his audience in long before delivering his main point. The Great Communicator was on full display in August of 1984 when he addressed more than 17,000 people at an Ecumenical Prayer Breakfast in Dallas, Texas.
Knowing his audience, Reagan spoke with ease on the role of religion being necessary in American society. For the actor, turned activist, turned politician, this was the role of a lifetime. His earliest speaking experiences had taken place decades before in the familiar surroundings of his small, rural Illinois church. Surrounded by tens of thousands of people of faith, he seemed fearless in his religious convictions and beliefs. Reagan chose to expand on a subject almost as old as the presidency itself. He expanded on George Washington's farewell address, warning about the importance of religion and morality in America.
Reagan, ever the storyteller, began with a brief history of the founding of our country and religion. Among his first statements was one that might sound surprising to modern ears. Our founders, he said, understood that there is a divine order which transcends the human order. This is a bold statement for a society that seemed to have conquered every obstacle, natural and human-made, placed before it over time. But this belief was at the core of Reagan's world. He quickly cited watershed moments and unassailable sources such as the Mayflower Compact, Washington, and other founders to show how deeply religion shaped America's beginnings. Reagan's remarks also demonstrated how pervasive religion is in government institutions, with chaplains serving various federal bodies, and that oaths of office themselves acknowledge God.
And as if that wasn't enough, Reagan reminded the nation of the revered place of George Washington, the man himself. Since 1799, when Washington was eulogized by his friend, Henry Lee, as being, quote, first in war, first in peace, and first in the hearts of his countrymen, end quote, Washington had remained in that vaunted seat in American history. Reagan used the words of Washington's farewell address to make his point, quote, of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports, end quote. Washington penned those words as a warning to his fellow citizens that a purely secular society cannot stand. He continued, quote, let us with caution indulge the supposition that morality can be maintained without religion, end quote. Nearly 2 centuries before, Washington had equaled prosperity with both religion and morality. He had also linked the existence of morality directly to religion itself. So, in Washington's worldview, religion was the foundation to a moral life, and both were required for the success for the Republic. A fairly straightforward equation that the founding generation understood.
As Reagan reached the crux of his message, he said, I believe that George Washington knew that the city of man cannot survive without the city of God, that the visible city will perish without the invisible city. That brief sentence not only strongly bound the religious and secular world, but it also drew Washington's views into the debate. His next sentences tied the abolition movement of the 19th century and the civil rights movement of the mid-20th century to the need for religion in society. Through all of these struggles, Reagan reminded his audience that the state was tolerant of religious belief expression in society. Society, too, was tolerant.
And then Reagan pivots to the 1960s and the litany of Supreme Court cases that banned organized prayer and the Bible from classrooms. To Reagan and many in his audience, this was the start of a movement to push religion not just out of schools, but out of public life altogether. It was something worth fighting for, and Reagan positioned himself as a leader in that fight.
The truth is, politics and morality are inseparable. And as morality's foundation is religion, religion and politics are necessarily related, end quote. He essentially restated George Washington's belief for a 20th century audience. He reminded his listeners that no one religion is established in America and no worship is mandated. But then he cautioned, quote, "We poison our society when we remove its theological underpinnings. We court corruption when we leave it bereft of belief." End quote.
Reagan's message then turned to one of tolerance and his belief that a tolerant society is open to and encouraging of all religions. He equated God with virtue and said belief opens our conscience to things beyond this world, a glimpse of the eternal. Reagan was leading up to the line that echoed across Dallas that morning and across the nation for decades to come. Without God, democracy will not and cannot long endure. If we ever forget that we are one nation under God, then we will be a nation gone under.
These were strong words, backed by a strong belief, both personal and political, for Ronald Reagan. Words the nation needed to hear after the tumult and strife of the 2 previous decades. Reagan's message had a great impact on his supporters and his party as they moved forward from that day. The strongest response came from what was becoming known as the religious right. Christian citizens who shared Ronald Reagan and George Washington's belief that religion and morality were essential to America's future. Groups like the Moral Majority, an organization that had supported Reagan during his first election, now were emboldened by his message and increased their efforts to register voters and defend school prayer and the sanctity of life.
Other religious leaders across the country celebrated Reagan as a champion for their cause and endorsed his candidacy as one closely aligned with religious and moral beliefs. One well-known pastor even declared that Reagan demonstrated trust in the living God and his Son, Jesus Christ. Endorsements like these helped Reagan sweep the 1984 election in one of the largest landslides in electoral history. His message also stoked the fight for religious liberties in the United States for generations. Reagan drew a clear line against the march towards secularization. His words gave momentum to the movement, and in the years that followed, those fighting for religious freedom carried that line forward, determined to keep America one nation under God.
Ronald Reagan reminded us that democracy cannot endure without God. His words echo the wisdom of George Washington, and they still challenge us today. This is Faith and Freedom 250.